Stephen, I think you may want to get started just because I know that it's a really full agenda.
Absolutely. Welcome, everyone. My name is Stephen Weiss. I'm the Director of Leadership Initiatives at Understanding Language. I'm joined by my colleague, Jeff Zwiers, as well as a number of educators from 3 school districts in California, Tahoe Truckee School District, West Contra Costa Unified School District in Richmond, and Azusa Unified School District down in Southern California. Go ahead, Jeff. As part of this hour's webinar, we're going to start with a little bit of discussion on, and go ahead, Jeff, click through one. We're going to start by talking about what are some of the key aspects of formative assessment. Both you're going to hear from practitioners of what they did pre-COVID-19, as well as we'll be talking about in remote learning environments. The second part of this webinar, we'll be asking a number of educators to share some instructional practices that they've been using already in remote environments that allows them to elicit, analyze, and respond to student evidence. And then finally, in the last part of this webinar, we're going to step out of the classroom and have 2 of our district leaders talk about the kinds of systems that they have now and that they envision that will help cultivate effective formative assessment practices. So with that, we're going to begin, and Jeff, go ahead. And Jeff Zwiers will start talking about formative assessment.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jeff Zwiers, and I'm the Director of Professional Development for Understanding Language, a colleague of Stephen's. This is a very nutshell version, as you can all imagine, fitting all this into 1 hour. So, so some key highlights of formative assessment that we're going to focus on for remote learning are gathering right now information about learning in order for the teacher to provide immediate feedback to students on needs and strengths, and then the teacher to adjust instruction now and in the future. I like that, that photo right there. And then for students, so it's not just the teacher all the time, it's for students to stay engaged and to improve their own learning. And we will touch on peer and self-assessment in both of the webinars. And we'll actually ask a question later on about what kinds of peer and self-assessment you guys are already using. So the SBAC formative assessment process is a cycle, as you can see, with with the 4 clover leaves. And the first clover is clarifying learning goals. That can be for yourself and also for students, and even students clarifying among themselves, you know, what are we going to learn? And then after that, there's the teaching part, the elicit stage, where you're actually trying to get evidence through instructional activities. In this case, you know, in parentheses, you have here engage in a learning activity. And we'll talk about what are the best types of learning activities that foster great formative assessment. And then the interpret stage, after we get that evidence, or even kind of while we're looking at that evidence in the classroom, we analyze it and we interpret it to figure out what are the strengths and gaps, what are the things we need to do and students need to do, either to keep on doing or some changes that we need to make. And then, of course, the acting is, you know, the actual doing and engaging in those changes. What are the next steps? How do we change things? How do we keep things the same? What different types of evidence might we look for next time? So that's kind of the cycle, the framework that we'll be looking at for the rest of this hour. And then Stephen.
Thanks, Jeff. So when we think about what are the kinds of pieces of evidence that we want to formatively assess remotely, go ahead, Jeff. Obviously, some things we want to hear about from our students and learn about is their sort of nascent understanding of the content that they're learning, the language that they're apprenticing into, and the kind of disciplinary thinking and practices. And I think that's something that we've really been focusing on in understanding language, is this notion of disciplinary practices, whether that's argumentation in language arts or mathematical reasoning, or asking students to explain with supportive evidence, because those kind of disciplinary practices are really the bridge that connect content and language together. And in order to make an argument, you have to bring content and you have to embed it in language. So I think this is what people think about when they consider what are the kinds of things we should formatively assess. But if you engage students in really robust, engaging activities, you can also begin to assess these kind of pieces. So in these great, robust activities, you can see students sharing out their creativity, leading to the sharing what kind of agency they have, their levels of engagement, as well as social skills. And so what we'll hear about from teachers, the way in which they're capturing, for instance, student videos, and then they're able to share those with other students remotely so they can see models of creativity and empathy and agency, et cetera. Right, Jeff.
Yeah, and so now we'd like you to, often what happens in formative assessment, we think of, oh, the teacher's walking around or looking at papers or observing students, but there's also a powerful component to formative assessment, and that's peer assessment and self-assessment. So what we'd like to do right now is just capture some of your ideas related, and that's why we put these images up here, but related to some of the things that we are looking to assess, and then also the formative assessment process. How can we do this? How can we help students peer assess and self-assess in remote learning? And some of you have been already been doing this, and we'd just like to capture the ideas in the chat box, and then we'll kind of do a quick synthesis and analysis of that after about 3 or 4 minutes. So go ahead and go to the chat box if you can find it, and just enter in some of the ideas. You can also put in questions there as well, but we're kind of looking to gather what's going on out there around peer and self-assessment. Keep going.
Let's take about 1 more minute and we'll share out some of the ideas that we see. Yeah, I'm seeing a lot, Jeff, as I'm reading over these, of use of videos for student reflection or peer reflection. I think we'll see some of that as teachers, our teachers are presenting later this morning. I think that's great. Anytime we can get students to actually self-reflect, but also use language. So if they're videotaping themselves, talking about their progress, where they're at, what helped them, who helped them, what are next steps, I think it's invaluable, and it's so great to see that so many people in the chat box are using tools, I see Google Docs, Hangouts, all of that, to do that kind of work.
Yeah, and I've also noticed quite a few like surveys and polls, even some of the tools within Zoom, thumbs up, chat box, that kind of thing, kind of like what we're doing right now. In a way, we're formatively assessing right now with the chat box. Okay, just try to finish up a couple more, and then we'll keep going. By the way, we'll make this available, the transcript of the chats, because if you can enter anything in anytime during the hour, and we'll kind of keep track of it, and we might even do some synthesis for webinar 2.
Yeah, that's great.
Mm-hmm.
Well, as Jeff said, feel free to continue to put in ideas. This is why it's actually absolutely critical that we're involving teachers, as you're going to hear from in the next section, because all of you out there are the experts on this. And so in a second, I'm going to ask our first presenter, Tess from Tahoe Truckee, to talk about what she's been trying out. We want to keep in mind, of course, that all of these are nascent practices, new practices. We're all learning together. So we were just so impressed by what we heard from the educators that you're going to hear from now about what they're trying out. So Tess, go ahead and take over, and let's hear a little bit from your classroom.
Okay, great. So I'm Tess Timmons, an English teacher at Truckee High School, which is Placer County and Lake Tahoe. So I'm going to talk to you about Clover 1 and 2, intended learning and activity evidence, and then Jeff's going to play a video, and then I'll talk about the next 2 Clovers. So Clover 1 for me is intended learning. So the students had to write an article. They are the teen authority writing to adults, and this article could actually be used and published in their local newspaper. Next, the students were to gain reasoning and argumentation and justify their evidence. We used a theme and multiple texts, so reading literature and also reading informational text as well, to start the thinking behind their concepts. Then we went to research. The students needed to gather data, but I didn't want just a simple Google search. So we started with the video that you'll watch, an organic conversation around the theme, which in this case was privacy, to spark the ideas of what they chose for their article. They also then had to create a Google survey of 100 students, 50 of which went to our school, and a phone interview outside of California for some sort of national data. This all leads to student choice, picking their prompt to fully engage with their writing practice. So now we'll move to Clover 2. Students have choice, and I'm specifically talking about the video we're about to see. They could choose who they wanted to record the conversation with and what they wanted to talk about. The only idea I gave them was something about privacy. So Carlos in the video chose his sibling and to talk about privacy, parents, and phones. The gamut of conversations ran from government to civilians, business and clients, all in dealing with privacy. What I'm looking for evidence is a reference to the multiple texts that Carlos read, or any student, how he relates the theme to the world around him, which is pretty huge for 9th grade. And does he have a clear understanding of how this conversation bridges to writing the article? Is he picking out a prompt himself? So Jeff's going to play the video for you. You'll see the bubbles that were already explained by both Stephen and Jeff. So just see how many bubbles you can pull out while you watch this video.
Great.
Hi, I'm with my sister Joanna Diaz, and we're going to talk about privacy.
Hi.
So how old were you when you first got your
I was 12 when I got my first phone.
phone? I got mine when I was it was in like 4th grade.
Fourth grade, I think so, yeah.
So I was like 9 or 10.
Mm-hmm.
So do you think it's important for teens to have privacy?
I think it is important because, I mean, everyone should have some type of privacy.
Mhm.
So it's good for parents to give kids their privacy.
Yeah. And do you think our parents give us more privacy than they did to you guys when you were younger?
Not really. I think we got about the same amount of privacy. They've never been too strict about it. I think that's why we all trust them with
Yeah.
everything, because they don't
really say anything.
Yeah, they're not into our business that much.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, it was recorded a little soft, so I hope you could hear it, but I'll go through it and pick out some main parts. So now we're moving to interpretation. Just like how you looked at the bubbles, I do as well. So Carlos did hit content because he read an informational text article about cell phones, privacy, and parents. He had creativity. Out of 32 students, he's one of 2 that chose to interview his older sibling. Most students in my class chose to interview their parents. This was during COVID. I wanted them to interview someone at home to generate conversation at home. He had empathy and compassionate engagement. He asked his sister, do you think that our parents were harder on you, the older siblings who first had phones, versus me, the younger siblings who got phones? And then also agency and identity. Carlos is very quiet in class. So by choosing his partner, he is able to come out of his shell. This helped me when I assigned him in groups. He was always very quiet. But in the next unit that I taught for Raisin in the Sun, I purposely put him with Emmy, a Latina girl who is his friend, who is very driven, and then Owen, a Caucasian student in my class who is very compassionate and quiet like Carlos, so that it would help all of them come out of their shell. So now we move to feedback and adjustments. And I'm going to have Jeff switch slides to the Flipgrid picture, which some of you mentioned in the chat box. So with the Flipgrid picture, you can see that the video that Carlos created was on Flipgrid. So the screen that I'm seeing as a teacher is the same view as all of the students. So Carlos made his film, and then a bubble is attached to Carlos's picture because that's me replying back not only to him, but the entire class. So I wanted to make sure that Carlos was understanding what kind of kernel of information he could pull and then use to write his article, or anyone else who is watching this Flipgrid in my class, so that we are generating a whole class conversation and brainstorming together. I talked to him about, oh, you're saying that your parents didn't harp on you, didn't check your phone, and that created more trust with you and the parents. I wonder, could that be a paragraph in your article? Could that be a theme that you have? If you're the student writing and the adults are the audience, how will you become the authority of teaching them how to gain trust with teenagers? What will that sound like, look like, walk like? So everyone could watch that. I then assigned my class to watch at least 3 of the videos within our classroom. And they took notes, and then they could use that information in their essay. They actually were supposed to pull one of these videos and use information in that essay. How I would adjust this next time is, instead of me going on 32 different videos and pulling those kernels, I would have, let's say, my next year students do the interview, and then I would show them Carlos's interview with my bubble kernel attached to it, showing how I pulled information and bridged to the article. And then I would ask all of them to go on and do that for each other, so that it's, again, me taking another step out and them pushing in. This ended up becoming like 7 to 10 page research projects that they created with data that they pulled themselves, pictures, graphs, and charts. It worked really well. Thank you.
No, thank you. We talked before this about how it was interesting that you pulled, like you said, those kernels that the students might not normally grab onto and want to expand. So that was one of the ways that you could, get in. And you didn't want to get into 32 different videos, I know, but you have that ability. And with certain students, you might think, okay, I'm going to go in and see what kind of kernels I can encourage them to expand. So thank you very much. And also, I wanted to point out that some of the things, and I think you mentioned this before, but you might be looking for some of the things in some of the ovals, but then other things might pop up. So it's part of formative assessment, whether it's in the classroom or online, is being open and having those, eyes and ears for as many bubbles as you can handle, rather than just a myopic focus on, okay, so it's got to be content and that's it. So anyway, thank you very much. The next we have Emma, and different grade level. So I'll just let her introduce herself, and then we'll go through a similar process just to get a little more immersion into what everyone's doing.
Hi everyone, my name is Emma Kohut. I taught for the last 2 years 2nd grade at Grant Elementary, which is in West Contra Costa in the East Bay. So the activity that you're going to watch in this video was during a Zoom call. So I had Zoom calls with my entire class. In this video, there was about 10 students, and what they were expected to do was to read an analog clock and tell the digital time. So the evidence that I looked for, and you can look for, is how well they were able to articulate the content and tell time, and also the process and how they got to their answer and the language that they used to express that. Look for how I, as a teacher, am able to stretch their language and the teacher moves that I use when engaging with the student. So you can go and play the video.
Okay.
So yeah, everyone finish putting in the numbers right here and what time it is, right?
Ready.
Okay. So I don't know, pretend I don't know what to write here, you guys. Pretend Ms. Coates like, I don't know. Could someone tell me what I need to write right here?
It's 6:15 because the little hand is between the 7 and the 6 and the 7.
All right, Shavi, so what I hear you saying is you found out the hour by looking at the little hand, and where's the little hand pointing?
In the middle of the 7 and the 6.
Okay, so what did you put for hour?
I put 6.
But how did you know not to put 15 right here? Why didn't you put 15 and then 6?
Because there's no 15 in the hours. There's only 15 in the minutes.
Okay.
So 15 in the minutes, that means the big hand, that's the minute hand, is pointing to the 3.
Thank you so much. The big hand, the minute hand is pointing to the 3, so you put the minutes right here? Okay. So what Shavi did was he first looked at the hours and then he looked at the minutes. Is that right, Shavi?
Yeah.
You first looked at the hours, then you looked at the minutes? Okay.
All right, thank you. So what I expected from that video was that Shavi would be able to articulate the content and explain his process, which he did. And he took agency of this assignment. He was really confident. He said, yes, this is how I did it. And he was also just showed mastery in his disciplinary thinking. What I did not expect, and something that I noticed watching this back, was as a teacher, I had to pull back, and I don't know if you noticed in the first 20 seconds, I was about to interrupt him and interject, but I let him complete his thought. So something that I'm going to continue to do to develop language and disciplinary learning is stepping back, and that can actually be a powerful tool to allow students to completely finish what they were thinking. Some other teacher moves that I did is I repeated what he was saying. I said, I heard you say, or I presented a mistake and asked him to justify his reasoning and why he did that. And it was actually really powerful that he said the things in the way he did, and that he said the hour hand was between 6 and 7, and that's how you know, because that's something that I might not have gone back and articulated, but it was really powerful to have that so that the other students on the call were able to understand his thinking and how he got to his answer. Something that I'm going to continue to do and that I maybe would have done a little differently is I would have engaged the other students in more of a student-to-student dialogue. So some of you chatted in the chat that a really powerful tool of Zoom is doing pull-out groups. So in the future, I would definitely have a pull-out group and ask students to respond directly to Xavi and maybe say, what was one thing that Xavi said that you learned and you can put into your toolbox? Or can you use your words to explain how you got to the answer that might have been different than how Xavi got to the answer? So I found that Zoom and using this tool of sharing screen and also annotating while the student is explaining was a really powerful tool in engaging students with language within math. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. Feel free, everybody, to put questions for all of our folks up here. I only want true-false questions for me, please, but for everyone else. Also, I want to, one thing we talked about in preparing this presentation was the view that we can really take advantage, even though we're forced to use technology right now and forced into remote learning, instead of saying, oh, you know, this is way worse. You know, it's turning it around and thinking there are some great opportunities, and we just saw from Emma and Tess, and we'll see others. There's some great opportunities to get, you know, to get some really good formative assessment happening, sometimes even more so than what we get in a classroom full of 30 whatever students. That's, you know, the things are crazy. And so we just want to encourage, you know, that point of view as well as we move on. Any other, Stephen, did you have?
Yeah, actually, while you're moving on, I just wanted to point out, I think that example that you gave, Emma, was great, because what we're looking for when teachers bring forth evidence is not necessarily the perfect lesson, the perfect activity, but actually something that makes a case for something. So the fact, Emma, that you reflected and said, this went well, and these are things that I would do differently or more of, that's what we want out of formative evidence. So definitely share the successes and the great things and talk about what made it a success so you can repeat those things in the future, but also being able to share things. I mean, that was excellent, but also something that you can say, yeah, this was great, and here's some things I would do differently. That's really the power of sharing these kind of pieces of formative evidence.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. All right, this is a little bit of a transition, but we're going to transition into instructional activities. Even though this webinar is focused on formative assessment, one of the things that we need to think about and remember is that if you have instructional activities that are just so-so or don't produce a whole lot or aren't that engaging to students, you're going to get less evidence to look at. So it's sort of we weave these together so that the more powerful and engaging and rich the instructional activities are, often you're going to get a lot more evidence and a lot more thinking and language and all those things in the ovals that we're looking for. So even though this doesn't cover everything that an instructional activity should have, here's a few things to think about. And the first thing is a set of 3 features. And it doesn't have to have all of these features, but the more it has these features, the better usually, especially with respect to language. Because one of the things that, you know, we look at, especially in understanding language, we look at a lot is language development and the power of language and learning. And so the 3 features that we're looking for and trying to build into as many activities as possible. The first one is building up a key idea. And this would be an idea in the discipline that is important that we want kids to remember. It's not just memorize this little thing and get the, you know, choose B and that's it. It's part of a bigger unit or part of a bigger concept. And I have a little example of this is what a group of students did one time. They built up their idea based on articles that they had read about, I think it was about punishment of, I don't know what it was, juvenile justice, I think, but it was, they just built up their idea using this, using the Lego pieces, the large Lego pieces. And then a second feature is that the built in is there's a clarification and support of ideas. Now, often we will tell kids in an essay, hey, support your ideas, and you got to have 3 pieces of evidence. But here, what we're trying to do is build into kids, it's a mindset of, I'm going to clarify and support my ideas as much as possible. And so I'll give an example in a second, but of these features. But a lot of kids are like, if they don't want to clarify or want to support, they're going to do the bare minimum. We don't want the bare minimum. We want the opposite. And you saw a couple of great examples of not the bare minimum previously. And then finally, bridging information gaps. This is why language was invented. And in a lot of cases, if kids don't feel that they're bridging an information gap, whether they're reading, writing, listening, speaking, or conversing, that's those 5 letters up there. If they don't feel like they're doing it, they're not going to work as hard. In fact, none of us do. If we don't feel like we're really bridging information gaps, we're just going to do the bare minimum. So for example, if there's a think, pair, share, which is a common activity, most of you have probably seen mediocre to poor think, pair, shares in your day. And a lot of that is because they're missing one or more of these features. So if I don't have a reason to share with my partner, like to build up an idea in his or her mind, or to build up an idea in my mind, I'm not going to speak or listen that much. If there isn't clarifying or supporting, if I don't ask you to clarify, or if I don't ask you to support your idea that you're sharing, maybe it's an interpretation of a historical document, let's say, and you just say, this is what I think, and I just say, okay, all right, that's good. And if I don't have a reason, I'm not going to listen hard. If I don't ask you to support, you're not going to. And so, these habits work together. And then finally, the bridging information gaps. If I don't know what you read or your opinion on it, I'm going to be more interested. If I already know, if we read the same article and the teacher says, okay, share a summary of the article with your partner. Oh, well, you already read it, so I'm not going to work very hard to talk about it or listen. I read it, so I'm not going to listen. So you see where this is going. This is a way to produce rich thinking and language in actually most, if not all, activities. And then this other feature would just be it inspires, and I highlighted that because inspiring students to produce useful, capturable, and analyzable evidence is different than forcing kids to do that. Again, if they're kind of forced to do that, or if they're just trying to get points, often they're going to do just enough to get whatever points they want, right? So in this case, we're trying to come up with activities that really inspire students to think, do, act, and talk, and read, write, listen, speak, and converse. So now what we're going to do is we're going to see and we're going to look at couple activities. We have Emma up again, and this time though we're going to look at kind of a teaching activity and try to look at some of the things on the left-hand side. Emma, do you want to talk us through it?
Yeah, hi again. So in this activity, it's the same activity Tess used of Flipgrid. So the student had to answer the question, who is your hero? And what I was looking for is how they were able to justify their answer using not only who, but why. So what you should look for in this clip is how well student was able to use their own words to support their idea and how they were able to perform.
And any other things that come up on the left-hand side, right?
My hero is a dog because they can help you when people can't see, and from bad people that try to get inside your house.
All right, so this student, his name is Josue, and this clip demonstrates a lot of the importance of bridging the information gap. So Flipgrid is really critical in teaching because you can see how students progress from their first Flipgrid video to the end, and you can also see how to scaffold and provide sentence frames and language supports within the prompt itself. And students have to watch the teacher example in order to create and engage in their own meaning and their own answer. They can also respond to each other, and they can also respond to their peers. So it's a way of really getting them to engage with the information and see what things that they didn't understand, so that the next time I go back to teach, I know where they need additional support. This student specifically, Josue, in his first video, would have like 1 or 2 word answers. So at the beginning of this interaction on Flipgrid, he might have just said, my dog. But I was really able to see that he had his own unique idea and was able to perform and give those linking words such as because. And I really feel that Flipgrid is a powerful tool when trying to clarify things that you're trying to engage with students in all different fields. So this is specifically what I used for English language development, but it also relates to the bigger umbrella of the content standard in 2nd grade of creating and formulating an opinion statement. So if students are able to articulate and speak their own opinion statement here, I can also use that and support them with creating an opinion statement written during writing. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Emma. That's great. Great. I'm going to introduce my colleague and friend Tara from Tahoe Truckee, who's going to talk about the way in which she had her students do a pro-con activity remotely. So Tara, go right ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm Tara House, and I am the ELD and accountability coordinator at Tahoe Truckee. And during this at-home learning time, I just volunteered to support a group of newcomers, just meeting every week, a couple times a week. I don't normally teach in the classroom except to do like demo lessons and that kind of thing, but it's been really fun to work with kids, you know, regularly this last few months. So in this video, again, we are looking for those, you know, building up, clarifying, supporting, and bridging those information gaps. Specifically, we talked a lot before the conversation about building up ideas and kind of the way that you might stack your ideas so that they fit into categories. So, you know, lots of big idea with lesser examples, and then clarifying was another one. So one of our students in this video, the one who's speaking, is named Alexa. She's actually a little bit farther along, has been here for a few years, and then the student who is going to be doing the clarifying is Katie. She's a much newer student, and I think one thing to really highlight, before we play it, it would have been, for those of you with the digital divide kind of questions, we normally would do this on their own devices. They were having so many internet problems and so many device problems that they ended up doing it on one of their phones because this was the day we scheduled to actually video what we were doing. We don't normally video it. And so they did it, they got together in the space between their houses and did it with some permission from their parents to be together. So, but this could easily be 2 students at their own houses and on their own meet with me. So, so we'll go ahead and look for the ways that, you know, the clarification and transitions to help with building the ideas.
And what was the topic?
Oh, the topic of this, they chose social media.
Okay.
The good thing about social media is that you could meet a lot of new people, and those people might be like a person that
in the future they could be an important person. Like maybe you like build a relationship with them. Like maybe they became your friend. They could mean a lot to you, and that's why social media is good because you can meet a lot of new people. What do you mean by? I What do I mean by you can meet a lot of new? Um, what I mean by you can meet a lot of new people is that it's like okay. What I mean that you can meet a lot of new people is that they can become like really close to you. You can build a bond with them. Like for example, like me and you are friends. Like say that we met on social media. Like and then we became really close friends and like we have a lot of fun with each other. Yeah, that's what I mean. Fun. But another really well, on the other hand, social media could be bad because a lot of hate that people get, like they get a lot of hate about like their body, about like their face and stuff. That's why social media is bad for me. Thank you, Liz. And for example, say that you're just scrolling through social media and then somebody just commented on your post saying that you dance bad or you have a like you're insecure about yourself, saying that like you don't you don't have like a nice body and that doesn't really mean anything, but people just like to hate on people because they don't feel good about themselves sometimes, and people could be just really rude sometimes.
Yeah. So one thing about this video that I really stuck out to me was the very beginning when Katie says, "What do you mean by?" and she just doesn't fill in that blank. So that was something that we didn't really realize that she didn't fully understand to like add in something where those dots are, and it ended up being a conversation that we had later. But the beautiful part was how Alexa handled it, right? By just going with it and really trying to help her friend kind of make it work and validate the language that she was trying out. So for us, it was really fun to do. It was a lot of learning about where their language was for me, as far as what to do next. One thing that really struck me was like adding in some additional frames. What we ended up doing for our next conversation was adding in one advantage, one disadvantage to whatever the topic was for the pro-con. In Tahoe Truckee, we are doing a lot with academic conversation and this idea of authentic communication. We just really feel like the students grow so much more the more they interact with each other. And one thing out of this video was I was impressed with Katie's listening. She and I debriefed afterwards in Spanish, and she really understood everything that Alexa was trying to communicate. And I think it really helped her in just her formation of her oral language. So that was really exciting to us. And then we just really liked this pairing of a little bit different language levels. You could really see more language coming out of Katie than I think she would have had with another newcomer at her level. So yeah, and then we did for Katie when we did this activity. I know a lot of people struggle with working with newcomers, and what we did for Katie was actually go through it in Spanish, have her do kind of a pro-con in Spanish, and then have her come up with key ideas that Alexa helped her translate so that she could have those ready. And that was really helpful for her.
Wow, wonderful. I'm sure you could go on, but you can't. So,
okay.
So let's move on, transition a little bit, and Stephen's going to introduce some other folks that are a little more at the district level, and see how.
Yeah, just to wrap that up, Jeff, just hearing from those teachers and Tara, that last piece about the power of heterogeneity actually in grouping students, and how students can scaffold for each other, even if they're at different levels of language learning. So thanks to all of the teachers there. And so this last section is just about how do we move from formative assessment process, helping individual teachers better support their students and leverage the strengths they have, to how do people at the district level think about ways in which they can take this formative assessment process, and how does it impact their thinking around professional development strategies, about the program's policies and practices that they have right now, and tailoring them to remote or hybrid environments. What kinds of tools or protocols might they use to analyze student evidence? And of course, how are systems thinking about the challenges? I know someone mentioned in the chat, the sort of remote learning and the unequalness of access to technology and wireless, et cetera. So with that, I'm going to introduce Mark Labaco from West Contra Costa, who's going to tell us a little bit about the math work that they have been doing in their district and what they're thinking of in terms of next steps for the fall.
Thank you, Stephen. I'm Mark Labaco, West Contra Costa Unified. I work central office as math instructional specialist, and I work with 3 coaches centrally. And one of our roles is to provide PD and trainings to teachers and administrators. We've been promoting and training teachers in different forms of formative assessment practices over the past several years. Probably the main question that we ultimately want to ask is, did my students reach the intended outcome of my lesson today? Not only is it to determine what's being learned, but from an equity standpoint, identify who's learning, who isn't learning, and what to do about it. So one of the strategies that we've really been focusing on, and Jeff, go ahead, is during pre-COVID, was actually math training in student discourse strategies. And just as an aside, the National Council of Teacher Mathematics has several essential teaching practices, one of them being promote student discourse, another being elicit and use student evidence of student thinking, pretty much exactly what we're talking about with formative assessment right now. So we've worked on turn and talks, trained on group work, and we talked a little bit about number talks. And number talks, as many of you know, are brief, low anxiety class discussions on open-ended questions. It's an activity that embraces different ways of thinking and seeing things. It really promotes that positive math mindset that we really are working towards in changing the nature of thinking about mathematics, that we're all mathematicians. And because it's an inclusive and differentiated activity, student engagement is really high. It's a low floor, easy entry level, and high ceiling activity where students can justify multiple solutions, or teachers can dig in with deeper why questions. These are some of the number talk examples that we've encouraged and seen teachers to use in our district. And when March came around, we were excited to continue number talks as a formative assessment practice during synchronous instruction. This is an opportunity to elicit student evidence, evidence of student thinking, and to be able to interpret and act on that evidence. So in our transition the coaches put together some online number talks using Zoom. And this was not only to actually teach teachers what number talks was all about, which is kind of our ongoing learning, but in addition, kind of the tech ins and outs, the challenges with it, and how to work on training teachers on those ins and outs. So that's what we did so far. Moving forward, we're planning on continuing these trainings, but in the asynchronous realm, which Tess and Tara touched upon in their explanations, using Google Classroom, Seesaw, Flipgrid to do some training on collecting and analyzing the data and through data teams. So we'd like to create some way that we can adapt or create some protocols and train teachers on how they could do this in grade level team meetings, or if a coach goes in to work with teams of teachers, or even bringing some of this data, either the visual or the written data that's collected, and coaches can have a conversation centrally regarding this. So that's what we're hoping to move forward on as we continue our formative assessment work in distance learning. Thank you.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. Yeah, we're looking forward to hearing about what you do. Not every day, but maybe every other day. Does that sound okay? And now, next we have Dayna Mitchell. She'll introduce herself, but we're kind of zooming out a little bit more, and she'll share kind of what they're doing more at the kind of the district-wide level here.
Hi everyone, can you hear me? Yes, okay,
Yes.
great. My name is Dayna Mitchell, and I'm the Director of Curriculum and Instruction in the AUSD Unified School District. And in AUSD, our focus is to ensure that our instruction is standards aligned, it's equitable, rigorous, innovative, engaging for all learners through the use of our student success drivers. And those are collaborative practices, cognitive rigor, and academic discourse. And the way in which we know the extent that students are learning is through a formative assessment process using the Plan, Do, Study, Act model. So I'm going to give you kind of an overarching district perspective on how we do this. And using the Plan, Do, Study, Act model helps us to see and foster such instruction to be able to clarify, elicit, and interpret and act. We have 33% of our students in our district are learning an additional language, and we've been focusing on speaking and listening standards that have specifically used paired student conversation as a means to formatively assess learning and elicit evidence about student thinking. Last year, all grades and all content levels were scheduled for 2 days of professional learning, and part of that was collaborating in small grade and content level cross-school professional learning community groups to collaboratively plan the lesson activity that included the student paired academic conversation. And then we implemented the do by going into each other's classrooms as a team to implement the activity with students, and collected student conversation data. That's recorded conversation data. We use School Video Recorder app for that. And then as a team, they studied focused students' recorded paired conversations using a protocol to analyze, interpret, and then inform instruction. And there's several components of that protocol that are important. One of the pieces is what's the extent to which students are building on each other's ideas, clarifying, and of course, how they're using academic language as well. And then as a result, we implement the ACT by adjusting instruction for that second round in the PDSA cycle. Lots and lots of different student learnings or teacher learnings as well. Examples would be a need for teachers to clarify intended learning through explicit modeling, providing stronger and clearer feedback to students. Sometimes we need support in creating the right prompts to promote those extended student interactions. And all of these learnings provided us with areas of needed professional learning and teacher support, which at the district level, we provide to our principals in monthly instructional leadership meetings, and also instructional coaching from our team of teachers on special assignment. As we move forward into this remote distance learning environment, whatever that looks like, we know that it is more critical than ever to implement formative assessment through a Plan, Do, Study, Act model as a result of school closures and subsequent learning loss as well. This is what we've been saying, is that formative assessment is going to have its day, right? This is the time really more than ever. So in terms of transitioning and focusing on improving instruction in a remote environment, we've begun to consider several different things. We can still do this. We're still planning on doing our Plan, Do, Study, Act model. We have a teacher math leadership teams that have been working on inserting additional math tasks in our curriculum maps as a means of formative assessment. And we're also, we also have a PK3 new collaboration that we're working with some other districts in California. And this will all be part of this work. Again, we'll be looking at those formative assessment opportunities. Part of the work that we're doing at the district level to be able to make sure this happens, there's a couple of things. One, it's critical that we build in PLC time for teachers to do this work. If it's not in the schedule and we have not planned it out in advance, then it may not happen, right, in terms of a regular basis in a cycle of inquiry. So our plan is to continue to do this. We had this actually when we went into closure, when we created our distance learning schedule that this last semester, we actually did build in PLC time for teachers to be able to work and plan and take a look at those common formative assessments. And that's really the linchpin to school improvement work, is how teachers are creating those common formative assessments and then being able to work together to really think about, again, how students are learning and then what we do to inform our instruction. And of course, continuing our virtual support of principals and modeling those instructional practices at those principal meetings every month, so then they can go back and they can model that with their teachers as well. We also see, just to finish here, is that we're looking at this distance learning opportunity as a way to take some of these really great practices and then be able to strengthen our formative assessment practices. We know we can do this work, and we know we can improve, and I think we can do even better just based on a lot of the tools and in different innovative strategies. So thank you.
That's great. Thank you so much. There's a lot there. And we're just we have about 4 minutes left, I believe. And we're just going to move in. Hopefully, you're building up your ideas about formative assessment from all of these wonderful presentations and bricks. So a quick recap would be, and this is somewhat associated with each of the clover leaves, would be to clarify what students need to be learning and clarify some other like what we're going to be looking for and be open to looking for as students are engaging in learning. And number two is improving instructional activities, making them as rich and engaging as possible so we can see and hear more language, more thinking, more learning from them, especially as they are communicating with each other and with us. And then the interpretation phase would be, we need to be analyzing multiple evidences. We saw that. We also want to look for a variety of learnings, and we also want to foster student and peer formative assessment. And again, some of these we will build on in the next session, in session 2. And then finally, just a kind of a reminder that, to give feedback as much as we can, and adjusting instruction. We saw some great examples of that. And then we just heard some examples of adapting our systems, which is something we will also strengthen even more in session 2. So finally, and this is what we want to cover, the the looking ahead, webinar 2, first of all, and then we'll talk about some next steps for preparing for webinar 2. So webinar 2 highlights in a nutshell, and that's July 23rd, by the way. At this same hour, we're going to look at improving formative assessment. We're going to talk about more in terms of cycles of improvement and these formative assessment within PDSA cycles. And then answering any burning questions that come up either from this chat room from today or from emails in the next month. And then we'll share some ideas, tools, and protocols. We'd also like you guys, participants, to also share some of the ideas more than what we saw in the chat today. But we'll also share some protocols that all of us will be working on in the next month. And finally, we'll highlight, adjusting our systems even more as we're getting ready for the next school year.
And then the next steps is, Jeff, as you had said, in terms of what folks can do for the next webinar to help all of us, is to think about the kinds of formative evidence that you want to collect from students and you want to learn from. So let's expand our notions of what formative evidence can be in a remote or hybrid space. And then thinking about how might you analyze that formative evidence, what kind of tools or protocols can you create, or can you adapt if you're already using something? And again, Jeff mentioned we'll be sharing some, like what Dayna's already using, what other districts have been using pre-COVID as well. But we'd like folks, if they have any tools or protocols or things that they're using when they look at formative evidence, student writing, or student interactions, or student output, like evaluating a speech, please do bring that. And I think with the last minute or so, if folks do have questions or things that they want to see covered right now, please do put that in the chat, and we will capture that and share that.
Mm-hmm. So now, just to finish before it turns 12:31 on my clock, we just want to thank you for your participation. Thank you for your interest in this very important topic. And we know that it's just 1 hour and there's a lot more to it, but we're hoping that some of these kernels of ideas come up, and we'll try to expand on those in the next 1 hour session that we have. But we're also open to having, answering questions in between, and also sharing some of the resources that we have. We'll also, I think, on the SBAC page, we'll have this PowerPoint PDF available along with some other tools that came up in this webinar.
Yeah, and with that last thing, I want to thank Smarter Balance for holding this, sharing this opportunity, and I wanted to thank all of our presenters from the 3 districts and sharing out sort of what they're working through right now, what they're thinking of for the fall. So with that, thank you again for attending, and we look forward to seeing all of you on July 23rd and hearing your questions and comments.